Hello everyone, this is Women's Grandmaster Sabina Foyshore. Welcome back to my YouTube channel. For today, I'm bringing you Endgame Series Part 3. In Parts 1 and 2, which I'm linking in the description below, I've discussed important terminology such as opposition, the box, and the magical rank. For those of you who haven't seen those videos, I highly recommend to start with those before proceeding to this one. For those of you who are already familiar with those, as well as with the box, let us get started with today's class. So, right now we have an A pawn, and we've already discussed what the box is. We're going to go diagonally all the way to the intersection of the rank of promotion. We're going diagonally all the way to the point where they intersect, and then we're doubling that triangle to this other side. And in this case, because it's a margin pawn, we have an actual square, but typically it could be a rectangular. So in this position, it is black to move. So black can play either king d8 or king to d7 in order to make it in the box and make a draw. But something that I'm going to be introducing today is shouldering. So you have to be very cautious on how you bring your king in some situations, because you really want to make sure that your opponent will not be able to win. So clearly, because it's an A pawn, you would say, well, I thought this is always draw, but not really. If white manages to get their king to b7 and keep you as black away from the a8 square, then white is going to be able to win, because the next 3 pawn pushes are controlled by the king. But in this situation, we can go king to d8, and if white goes king b6, we make it to the key square. So here, once again, I'm introducing this idea of key square. When we are talking about an edge pawn, the A or the H pawn, it is very important to make it to the starting position of the bishops. So if it's a white A pawn, then you have to make it to c8. If it's a black A pawn, white would have to make it with their king to c1. Then those other two squares clearly are going to be highlighted as well. So depending on where the pawn is, those are the squares where you have to make it in time in order to catch the pawn. So now if white pushes a6, black goes king to b8, and when we go a7, the king gets in front, and we already know from previous videos that this is a draw, because white has no way to help us, to force us to get away from in front of the pawn. Let's move on to a new terminology, which is going to be shouldering. So as you can see in this position, white's king is about to capture black's pawn, and now after doing so, the king will go away from being in front of their pawn and will consider pushing, not just consider, really do it, a7, a8, queen. So what can we do against that? There's no way for our king to make it in front of the pawn to a8, because white's king is already there. It's restricting us. So what is it that we're going to do? Well, we are going to do what is called a shouldering. So we're going to restrict white's king from exiting after they will have captured our pawn. So we are utilizing, in this case, the horizontal opposition or lateral opposition, depends how you want to consider this. In this case, white will capture the pawn, and we continue with the opposition, king c7, forcing white's king to go to c8. That is the only legal move that white can play. And now we can actually do two things. The most recommended one is to go to c8 to keep the opposition, and that way, as you can see, white will never have an exit, because we'll always keep them restricted from exiting. And then, of course, if they push the pawn, we will play king c7, and guess what? We are the ones who stalemate white. But there's another way in this position that we can actually make a draw, and that is by playing king to b6. In this case, we are attacking white's pawn. They have to push it, and now the king goes back to c7, restricting white's king from exiting, and now the pawn is stuck, and of course, there's no exit to the left side of the board, no z-files or anything like that, so the position is a draw. So this is called shouldering. For the remaining of the video, I will introduce more positions with shouldering, and I would recommend all of you to pause the video and try to figure out whether black, whenever it is black's turn, is going to be able to save the game or not. Here's another position that I recommend to you to pause the video and try to figure out whether you can shoulder white's king and make a draw. The answer is yes, of course. It is black's turn, so they can go king d7, take the opposition. White is going to capture the pawn in order to try to have some additional material to win. And then black doesn't necessarily need to shoulder white's king in this case. They can just go to c8 and then try to make it in front of the pawn for the easiest draw. If white is going to play king a7, we take the opposition, and now a6. So as you can see, the position is a little bit different from the previous one because now it is black to move. In the other position that I gave you at the start of, well, actually this one, right? We were talking about a similar position, but in this case it was white to move. But now we are talking about the exact same position with black to move. So please do not be worried. In this case, you still go king to c8. That was the key square where you had to go in order to make sure you would always make it in front of the pawn. Please, in this case, do not go king c6. I know it is very tempting to think, well, I can wait here as well. But no, my friends, please don't do that. White can go king to b8, and now they're supporting the push of the pawn for the next two moves. You have to go king to b6 to attack the pawn. There's no other way you can get in front of it. And now white plays a7, and the promotion of the pawn is imminent. So this would be a huge blunder, so please do not do it. Instead, go king to c8, because in case white goes away with the king from in front of the pawn and threatens to push a7, this is the right moment where you get in front of the pawn. And once again, a7 will not do anything because you get in front of it, and this position is a draw. Of course, you shouldn't be worried if white starts just wandering around with their king. All you have to do is to stay in front of the pawn. These three squares will suffice for black to save the game. Going back here, of course, if white goes king to a8, we simply wait king c7, and when white pushes the pawn, we go king c8, and yes, it's a draw. Stalemate once again. Alrighty, I've got a few more exercises lined up. In this case, it is black to move. What shall black do? Can they make a draw? Of course, they can. Once again, their king is close enough to make it in time, and they actually can also go king c5. They can also go king d6. Either moves is going to allow black, after white captures the pawn, to take the opposition, and then they will make it with the king either in front of the pawn, or they can just stay to c8 until that b8 square will be free, and then they'll get in front of the pawn. Moving on to my next example, now black's king is a little bit further away. Is the result going to change? Well, let's see. King to e6, white is going to capture the pawn, and now king to d7. Remember that key square that I mentioned at the start of the video? The bishop square. Black does make it on that square, and now when white goes king b6, king c8, and they will be able to make it in front. Should white play king a7, king c7, a5, remember, you always try to stay on these two squares when the b8 one is not available. And black makes a draw once again. Now, I wanted to point out something important, because some of you could say, well, you were talking about shouldering and about the c8 key square. What about that? Well, king takes a5, and now you have to go there to go to the c8 key square. You don't have really the opportunity to shoulder. The only time you use the shouldering is when you make sure that white's king stays on the A file, that they don't have the ability to actually go away from it. You don't want to shoulder them on the B file. Say you play this move, and now suddenly you say, well, I'll shoulder you. I'll play king d6. that would be a devastating mistake, because after white pushes a5, if you still try to make it in front of the pawn in c8, it's not going to work. White just plays king b7, and now they are restricting you from getting in front of the pawn, and the a pawn just marches to queen. Moving on to the next position, now we have the exact same position as before, but it is white to move. Do you think this is going to make a difference? The answer is yes, of course. When white captures this pawn, black needs 3 moves to make it to c8, and white will not allow for that to happen. King e6, king b6, king d7, threatening to enter in c8, very important. White takes the opposition. King to b7. And now, since you cannot make it on any of these 3 squares, as we discussed in video number 1, if black tries to circle around to catch the pawn from behind it, it's not going to work. Even if black's king is in the box of this pawn, which is this one, unfortunately, there's nothing they can do to actually stop the pawn, because once the pawn gets to a6, its next 2 pushes are controlled by white's king, and white is going to win. So, a very important move for white is king to b7, not allowing black to make it to c8. Please do not play a5. I want you to know, after king c8, we've had this position before, and this is a draw. And the last position that I had prepared for today's video is the following one. It is white to move. Can white win this position? The answer is not, because we are dealing with the shouldering. When white plays king to b7, black plays king d7, taking the opposition, and if we take the pawn, king to c7, keeping us, or keeping white simply restricted on the edge of the board. Now, of course, you can go king c8 as well, and in case white escapes, king b8. We've already discussed that. White can try to be a little bit tricky and just go king b8 and hope that black will make a mistake, but as long as you keep the opposition, you should be good to go. I really hope you enjoyed this video. This is going to be continued with more concepts and more positions, but so far we are kind of done with key concepts regarding king and pawn versus king. Although for today I've introduced positions where both sides had a pawn. One of the pawns was going to get away from the board pretty soon, so I have included those positions because I thought it's worth having them here. So I will continue this beginner series, but it's going to be with different concepts and different positions. I think the key concepts are pretty much done for now. I really hope you enjoyed the video. If you do enjoy it, thank you for subscribing to my channel, and please feel free to share the video with anyone else whom you think might be interested in learning some things about chess. Until next time, see you soon.